For those who don't know, in the history of Rome, many great generals and powerful leaders emerged. Included among them are Julius Caesar, Pompey the Great, and Mark Antony, and they are just some of the names that left a significant mark in history. But despite this, there was really only one person who was able to end decades of civil war and turn the former Roman Republic into an empire. And what's even more surprising is that this person was not born a king or an emperor. Instead, he started out as a simple boy named Octavian, but over time, he defeated all his rivals, conquered Rome's most powerful enemies, and became the first emperor in the history of the Roman Empire. So in this video, we will talk about the life of the first emperor of Rome, what he went through, how he became a leader, and how he defeated Rome's powerful enemies. But before we start the discussion, I would just like to ask you for a like and please subscribe to our channel. This is a huge help for us content creators, so let's get started. First of all, before there were emperors in Rome, there was a child born who many did not know would one day change the course of history. That child was none other than Octavian. He was born on September 23, 2363 BC in the city of Rome. At that time, there was still no Roman Empire. What existed at that time was the Roman Republic, a system where there was the Senate and elected officials who governed the state. Octavian was not immediately recognized as Augustus. His real name was Gaius Octavius. It was only later that he acquired the name Augustus. This was a title given to him after he became the most powerful person in Rome. Although his family did not belong to the very first aristocrats of Rome, they were still well known in politics and military service. For many generations, their clan served the Republic, so they gradually rose in society. His father, also named Gaius Octavius, was a respected official. Meanwhile, his mother Attia also came from an important family in Rome, but his mother had an important connection, and this would be to one of the most famous people in history, and that was Julius Caesar. Octavian's grandmother and Julius Caesar were siblings. This means he was related to one of the most powerful politicians and generals of Rome. Now, while Octavian was still young, the city of Rome was growing rapidly. The population was also increasing. The crowding was getting worse, and many wealthy families preferred to live on their estates outside the city, and Octavian's family was among them. Because of this, he grew up in Belitri, a town south of Rome. But his childhood was not easy. When he was almost 4 years old, his father died. This was a huge blow to their family. After some time, his mother remarried, but Octavian was not close to his new stepfather. Because of this, he was more often cared for by his grandmother, Julia, and it was here that he became more familiar with the influence of their famous relative, Julius Caesar. It is said that Octavian was close to his grandmother, so when she died in 50 or 51 BC, he himself delivered the funeral speech, even though he was only 12 years old. For many Romans, it was unusual for a boy like him to speak in front of such a large crowd. But this showed that even at a young age, he already had confidence and the ability to lead. As Octavian grew up, the situation in Rome became even more chaotic. On the outside, the Republic seemed very powerful because it had conquered a large part of the Mediterranean. It had also defeated its former rival Carthage. It had conquered many parts of Spain, Greece, and other territories. That's why Rome's power continued to expand. But behind all these successes was a big problem. As the empire grew, the generals who led the armies also became more powerful. Gradually, the soldiers and their leaders became more powerful than the government itself. Because of this, intense power struggles began. A bloody civil war broke out between two powerful generals, Gaius Marius and Lucius Cornelius Sulla. The winner was Sulla, and he became the dictator of Rome. But eventually he also stepped down from his position. So many Romans asked how long would it be before another general tried to take control of the entire republic. They didn't know that the answer to that question was about to come, And the answer could be found in three men who were gradually becoming prominent. Powerful personalities throughout Rome, and they were Pompey the Great, Marcus Licinius Crassus, and Julius Caesar. In the years to come, their struggle for power would change the fate of Rome. And in the midst of all this chaos, a boy named Octavian was quietly growing up. A boy not yet known to most people. But one day he would become the first emperor of Rome. Despite this, as Octavian approached manhood, the politics of Rome became even more chaotic. One of the wealthiest men in the Republic at that time was Crassus. He hoped to achieve greater honor through a new war against the Parthians, who ruled another powerful kingdom in the east. But his plan did not go well. In 53 BC, the Roman army suffered one of its heaviest defeats in the Battle of Carrhae. Crassus was killed and his campaign was almost destroyed. With his loss, only two people remained fighting for influence in Rome, and they were Julius Caesar and Pompey. While Pompey remained in Rome, Caesar was busy conquering the north. In just a few years, Caesar conquered a large part of Gaul, a region that is now a big part of France. And because of these victories, he became even more famous. His soldiers increased, his influence grew, and more people believed that he was the most powerful man in the entire republic. But not everyone was pleased with this. Many senators began to worry. For them, Caesar was becoming too powerful. They were afraid that one day he might completely take control of all of Rome. This is where the relationship between Caesar and Pompey began to break down. The Republic was gradually divided into two sides. Some supported Caesar, while others supported Pompey and the Senate. In 50 BC, the tension reached its peak. The Senate wanted to reduce Caesar's power. They tried to take away his control over the army, but he refused. Instead, he marched with his soldiers toward Italy. In 49 BC, he crossed the Rubicon River. That was an important boundary. It was forbidden for a Roman general to bring his army beyond that point. So when Caesar did this, the message was clear. Civil war was starting again. Romans were fighting against fellow Romans once more. Pompey and his allies were forced to flee. The conflict's center moved to the eastern Mediterranean. At first, Caesar experienced some problems, but eventually he won the most important battles. Pompey's forces were completely defeated. Pompey fled to Egypt. But when he arrived there, he was killed by the people who ruled the country. After this, almost no one could stop Caesar. In the following years, he defeated the remaining enemies in Africa and Spain. From a practical point of view, he was now the most powerful man in Rome. But there was one thing that many people often failed to understand. Julius Caesar did not become emperor. That's important to remember. His title was dictator. Nowadays, when we hear the word dictator, we usually think of a leader with absolute power. But in ancient Rome, it had a different meaning. When there was a major crisis, the Senate could grant a person special powers to make quick decisions. Usually, this was only temporary. But as time went by, many noticed that Caesar seemed to have no intention of giving up his power. And this is when some of the senators began to worry. While all of this was happening, Octavian continued to get closer to his famous relative. He was also slowly entering the world of politics. After his grandmother died, he moved back in with his mother. As he grew up, he was given different roles in society. Even at a young age, he was already starting to be recognized. He also wanted to prove himself in the military field. He repeatedly asked to join Caesar's campaigns. At first, his mother refused, but eventually she agreed. Because of this, Octavian witnessed some of the last battles of the Civil War, and here he gained valuable experience that he would use in the future. More importantly, he was noticed by Caesar. Caesar saw his abilities. He also saw his potential. So before the great general's life ended, he made a decision that would change history. He named Octavian as his adopted son and primary heir. At first glance, this might seem like a simple matter of inheritance, but in Rome, this was a huge deal. It's not just money that's being passed on. This also includes the name, influence, and support of followers. Caesar didn't know then, just how important that decision would be. Because while he held power, there were people secretly plotting against him. More and more believed that he had become too powerful. And for them, there was only one way to stop him, and that was to kill him. On March 15th, 44 BC, Caesar attended a Senate meeting. He didn't know that it would be the last day of his life. Suddenly, he was surrounded by a group of senators. In just a few moments, he was stabbed repeatedly. And that was where the life of the man who changed the history of Rome ended. Many stories emerged about his last words, but according to many historians, there is no solid evidence supporting that he said the famous line we often hear in movies. What were his last words? According to a report written by Suetonius, it is said that Caesar supposedly uttered the Greek word "keizoteknon," which could mean even you. Now let's go back. At the time when Caesar was killed, Octavian was not in Rome. He was on the other side of the Adriatic Sea undergoing military training. When he heard about Caesar's death, he immediately returned. When he arrived in Rome, that's when he learned the whole truth. He was Caesar's main heir. And because he was already adopted by him, many of the former dictator's supporters began to see him as the natural successor to his name. Because of this, his life suddenly changed. From being just a young politician, he became one of the most important people in Rome. He now had money, he now had a name, and most of all, he now had powerful allies. But along with this, a new struggle also began. Because after Caesar's death, there was no clear leader to replace him. Many people wanted to seize power, and one of the strongest candidates was Mark Antony, a veteran general and also a close friend of Caesar, and a man who believed that he alone deserved to lead Rome. But he did not expect that one of the biggest obstacles in his path would be a young man with almost no experience in politics and war. That young man was Octavian. In fact, after the death of Julius Caesar, Rome did not immediately have a new leader. Instead, a new struggle for power began. Some supported Mark Antony, Caesar's former trusted general. Others sided with Lepidus, who was also one of his allies. And there were also those who began to support Octavian. Even though he was only 19 years old, he quickly showed his skill in politics. He also understood that to gain power, he needed money, soldiers, and allies. As Caesar's heir, he gained great wealth and the support of many of Caesar's former followers. He used these to build his own force. Soon he became a senator. After 43 BC, he marched to Rome with his soldiers and was appointed consul, one of the highest positions in the Republic. At the age of 19, he was already one of the most powerful people in Rome. But he was not alone. Mark Antony and Lepidus were still there. So in 43 BC, the Second Triumvirate was formed. It was an official agreement that divided the power of Rome among three leaders. Octavian governed a large part of the West. Mark Antony, on the other hand, ruled the East. Meanwhile, Lepidus was given a smaller portion. Their first goal was to pursue those involved in Caesar's assassination. This included Brutus and Cassius. In 42 BC, the two sides faced each other in the Battle of Philippi in Macedonia. Brutus and Cassius were defeated, and as a result, both of them committed suicide. Because of this, the attempt to restore the old republican system ultimately failed. After this victory, Lepidus gradually lost power. Meanwhile, to maintain peace, Mark Antony married Octavia, the sister of Octavian. However, this alliance was only temporary. While Antony controlled the East, Octavian had his own problems in the West. Sextus Pompey, the son of Pompey the Great, controlled Sicily and the important shipping routes that brought food to Rome. Because of this, the city's food supply was put in danger. At first, they tried to make peace with him. But when he continued attacking the ships, Octavian sent his best general, Marcus Agrippa. In 36 BC, Agrippa finally defeated Sextus Pompey. Pompey fled, but was eventually captured and killed. This victory made Octavian even stronger. At the same time, Lepidus also tried to return to power. But many of his soldiers defected to Octavian. Because of this, he lost his position, and he was completely removed from politics. At this point, only two were truly fighting for the future of Rome: Octavian in the west and Mark Antony in the east. They both had armies, they both had wealth, they both had ambition, and it was clear that they could not remain equals forever. And here, the battle that would decide who would truly become the leader of Rome was drawing near. Even so, while Octavian continued to grow stronger in the west, the opposite was happening to Mark Antony in the east. At this time, Antony became close to Cleopatra, the Queen of Egypt and former lover of Julius Caesar. While based in Egypt, Antony also tried to strengthen his influence through new conquests in the east. One of his biggest goals was to defeat the Parthian Empire, Rome's longtime rival, but it did not go well. In 36 BC, his campaign against the Parthians failed, and he was forced to retreat with heavy losses. Although he was able to recover and rebuild his army after a few years, this did not completely erase the damage to his reputation. Meanwhile, Octavian took advantage of the situation. He used Antony's relationship with Cleopatra to destroy his image in Rome. Octavian's camp made it appear that Egypt was more important to Antony than Rome itself. This got even worse because Antony left his wife Octavia, who was Octavian's sister, to be with Cleopatra. Afterwards, more details from Antony's will came out, which caused even more doubt among many Romans. Because of this, the belief gradually formed that Antony might prefer to make Alexandria in Egypt the center of his power rather than Rome. So in 32 BC, the Senate finally stripped Antony of his power and declared war against Egypt. Civil war broke out again, but this was not a simple battle between Rome and Egypt. In reality, it was a fight between Octavian and Antony for control of the entire republic. Both sides gathered huge armies and massive fleets of ships. This was one of the largest preparations for war in the history of Rome. In 31 BC, the two sides faced each other near Actium in Greece. Here, the battle that would decide the fate of Rome took place. Although Antony had larger ships, Octavian's ships, under the command of Marcus Agrippa, were faster and more efficient. As the battle went on, Antony's armada struggled even more. Their coordination broke down and their defenses gradually collapsed. In the end, Octavian's camp emerged victorious. The Battle of Actium became the most important victory of his life. After their defeat, Antony and Cleopatra fled back to Egypt, but it wasn't long before Octavian's forces followed them. In 30 BC, after another defeat in Alexandria, Mark Antony took his own life. Just a few days later, Cleopatra also committed suicide. With their downfall, the last major civil war of the Roman Republic came to an end, and Octavian showed no mercy to anyone who could threaten his power. He had Caesarion, the son of Julius Caesar and Cleopatra, killed, as well as one of Mark Antony's sons. In his view, it was better to eliminate possible rivals before they could become a problem in the future. After this, Egypt was finally brought under Roman control, and for the first time in many years, Octavian had no more enemies. He was now the most powerful man in all of Rome. But he learned from the mistakes of Julius Caesar. He knew that suddenly seizing absolute power was dangerous. So instead of immediately calling himself king or emperor, he gradually changed the system of government. And in the years to come, he would do something that Uncle Caesar, Pompey, Antony, or any Roman before him had never done. He would establish a new kind of leadership that would change the history of Rome for many centuries. He knew that many Romans disliked a leader who openly and suddenly claimed all the power. So instead of declaring himself king, he acted more cautiously. He gradually strengthened his control over the army, wealth, and government, while showing the public that he still respected the Senate. On paper, it seemed like the old system was still in place. But in reality, Octavian now had the greatest influence in the entire republic. The most important change came in 27 BC. In this year, the Senate gave him two important titles. The first was Princeps, or the first citizen of Rome. The second was Augustus, a title that showed great respect and honor. From then on, he became known as Caesar Augustus. Although the word emperor was not yet officially used, as we understand it today, this was where the system that would later become the Roman Empire began. For many historians, 27 BC marks the beginning of the Roman Empire and the end of the Roman Republic. Once his power was secured, Augustus began to expand and strengthen Rome's territories. Egypt was formally brought under Roman control. Its territories also expanded in various parts of Europe and Asia Minor. In Hispania, or much of present-day Spain, he finally subdued the tribes that had long resisted Rome. This was important because the Romans discovered large gold mines in that region, which further enriched the empire. He also achieved an important victory in diplomacy. In 20 BC, the Parthian Empire returned the standards of the Roman armies that had been lost after Rome's great defeat at Carrhae several decades earlier. For many Romans, the return of these symbols was a great honor, but his leadership was not all about victories. In 23 BC, Augustus became seriously ill. Many believed that he was close to death. Because of this, he was forced to consider who would lead when he was gone. Although he recovered, he realized that a clearer and more stable system of government was needed. So he made changes to the way he governed. He no longer always held the highest position in the government. However, the most important power still remained with him. In this way, the Senate's concerns were lessened, while he remained the most powerful person in Rome. As the years passed, he did not only reform the army and politics, he also began to change the very way of life in Rome. At that time, the city's population was already very large. Fires were common. Crime was high. There was also a lot of disease and poverty. So he established permanent city guards and groups that responded to fires. In other words, Rome had a more organized police force and fire service. He also strengthened the Praetorian Guard, the special force tasked with protecting the capital and the emperor. Throughout the empire, he reorganized the system of governance. There were provinces governed by the Senate, and there were also those directly administered by representatives of the emperor. He also implemented a more efficient system of taxation. Previously, a large part of Rome's wealth came from newly conquered territories. But under Augustus, the collection of taxes from land and trade became more organized. Because of this, the empire's income became more stable. One of his most important projects was the construction of roads in different parts of the empire. There was also a system of stations where messages could be quickly passed from one place to another. Because of this, it became easier to govern the vast territory of Rome. In just a few decades, Augustus transformed a republic that had long been consumed by civil wars into a more organized, more stable, and more powerful system. And although he did not officially call himself a king, he became the model for almost all the emperors who followed him. The young Octavian, who once lost his father and grew up in a time of turmoil, became Caesar Augustus, the first emperor of Rome, and the man who laid the foundation of one of the greatest empires in world history. Augustus left his mark not only in politics and the military. During his reign, one of the most beautiful periods of art and literature in the history of Rome also flourished. During this time, famous writers such as Virgil, Horace, Ovid, and Livy wrote their works. Virgil wrote the Aeneid, an epic story about the origins of Rome. Livy, on the other hand, created an extensive history of the city from its founding up to the time of Augustus. Many of these writers were supported by Maecenas, one of Augustus' closest allies. Because of this, not only did Roman culture expand, but these works also helped strengthen the image of the new regime. Augustus's influence did not end with books. There were also significant changes in the city of Rome itself. He built many buildings, temples, monuments, and public structures. These include the Forum of Augustus and the massive Mausoleum of Augustus, where several members of his family were buried. At the same time, his allies also built public baths, buildings, and other projects that transformed the appearance of the capital. As his influence grew stronger, His titles and powers continued to increase as well. In 12 BC, Lepidus died, and Augustus acquired the title of Pontifex Maximus, the highest religious position in Rome. Then in 2 BC, the Senate gave him the title of Pater Patriae, or Father of the Nation. After nearly 3 decades of rule, almost all the important powers in Rome were in his hands. But there was one question that continued to trouble many. Who would succeed him? Augustus was married 3 times, but he had only one child, Julia. He had no children with Livia, his longtime wife. Because of this, he repeatedly searched for a possible heir. At different times, he considered Marcus Agrippa, Gaius Caesar, and Lucius Caesar as his heirs. But one by one, they all died before him. Because of this, attention gradually shifted to Tiberius, Livia's son from her first husband. Meanwhile, the borders of the empire continued to change. Augustus strengthened Rome's control over the Balkans, Judea, Armenia, and other important regions. During his time, the territories of Rome were almost connected from the Atlantic Ocean to the eastern part of Europe. At the same time, he reduced the size of the army to make the empire more stable and easier to govern. But there was one place he continually wanted to conquer: Germania. At first, the Romans expanded quickly in this region, but in 9 AD, one of the greatest disasters in Roman history occurred. 3 legions were deceived and trapped in the Cotterburg forest after being betrayed by their former ally, Arminius. Almost the entire army was wiped out. It is estimated that more than 15,000 soldiers died. After this defeat, Rome completely abandoned its plans to conquer all of Germania. Instead, they made the Rhine River a permanent boundary. On August 19th, 14 AD, Augustus died at the age of almost 80 years old. After more than 40 years of rule, he left behind an empire that was more organized, wealthier, and more stable than Rome during his youth. Tiberius succeeded him as the leader of the empire. Until now, historians are still divided in their opinions about Augustus. For some, he was the man who destroyed the Roman Republic and gathered immense power for himself. But for others, he was the leader who ended decades of civil war and brought peace and order to Rome. What cannot be denied is this: when Octavian was born, Rome was chaotic and divided. When Augustus died, it had become a powerful empire that would dominate much of the world for many centuries. And that is why, even today, more than 2,000 years after his death, he remains one of the most important people in all of world history.